So this forms part of our Share the Shores program. It's focused on our beach breeding birds in this kind of dynamic interface with people and, sea level rise and all of that happening in that kind of small strip of land that they breed in. Initially, this work was started by Selena Flores as a master's work. It was then upgraded to PhD under Professor Peter Ryan at UCT and Dr. Mark Brown, who was our previous director here at Nature's Valley Trust. When she finished her data collection, I think it was the 2016-2017 breeding season. That's when I took over, and I mainly focused on our high tourism beaches, which also, funnily enough, has the highest amount of breeding pairs. So that's Nature's Valley and the Lookout Beach or Lookout Peninsula. Okay, so just to kind of set the scene for you guys, I'm gonna just give some context. So right now, it's probably about over 1 billion people living on our coastline, and that's worldwide. And this has projected to double by the year 2025, which is around the corner. Of course, like many kind of small coastal towns, tourism is a growing industry. There's also competition for land, people moving down to the coastline. And of course, we have, as I just mentioned, sea level rise and climate change creating major storm surges, which puts a lot of pressure for animals, not just birds, that inhabit that kind of area between land and sea. So what really is the issue? So this work stemmed from a survey that Professor Peter Ryan was doing. He did his first survey in 1988, if I'm not mistaken. And he is a really keen birder, is really keen on waders. He did a coastal survey of the West Coast. And this is really just to monitor and count wading birds along the coast and also adjacent wetlands and water bodies. He did a repeat survey in, I think, 2012, which is around 25 years later. And he found that most wading birds, most shorebirds actually have increased. So they're doing a lot better. For instance, the oyster catcher has almost doubled along our coastline. And birds like Egyptian geese and sacred ibises are also flourishing around our coast. The one concerning thing that did come out from these repeat surveys is that our white-fronted plovers had actually decreased by almost 40% along the Western Cape coastline, and their density also decreased by 70%, which is quite staggering numbers. And he also reported that it seems like from at least 3 local beaches in Cape Town, these birds have become completely locally extinct. Basically, these plovers are not doing great, and it's not just in South Africa, it's unfortunately a global thing. We have the piping plovers. I think in Canada, there's the hooded plovers in Australia that are also having a really hard time just like keeping up their breeding success. So yeah, what is the issue? So it appears that they have low breeding success. It appears to be disturbance related. Dogs have been implemented in situations globally across the world. And locally in Pledge at the time, we didn't really have any dog control. So what Selena did, she did a survey monitoring all the way from Robert Beach to Nature's Valley. So that includes Robert Beach, Lookout Beach, Kearns Beach, and also Nature's Valley Beach. And she kind of just focused on what the birds are doing, what their breeding success is, just so we can have a better idea of what the state of our birds locally are in the area. Before we go too deep into the research and the data, I just wanted to talk a little bit about these birds, because I find they're really fascinating birds. A lot of people don't even know they exist, and this mainly because they are what I call the masters of concealment. So they're very cryptic. They are very well camouflaged through all phases of their life, basically. So adults are very well camouflaged. The chicks, the nests, the eggs are extremely well camouflaged. It's just like really the coloration really fits in with the sand and the environment. So for instance, you know, if you didn't know these birds existed, you wouldn't perhaps even see that the bird is there incubating on a nest. Yeah, so the males and females are different in terms of, you can see this headband on the males, and then the males often have, which isn't that clear in this particular picture, but they often have a really dark eye spot just behind the eye. So these cryptic behaviors are, is a trait that anti-predatory trait that have adapted and developed over millions of years. And if your predator is the only thing that you're really concerned of in an environment, it works fantastically, because to hide is the easiest way, especially if you can't defend yourself. But in a situation where people are involved, where there's, activities on beaches, it becomes a bit more stressful for the birds, and hiding sometimes isn't the best option. For instance, here on the left-hand side, that's not a typical nest, I would say. It's typical for this pair that did this. So they often climb underneath debris to lay their eggs. Normally what you see is a little scrape in the sand. It's often surrounded by vegetation or woody debris or leaf litter. And often they will do what they did here, and it's actually to cover up the eggs. So you'll see just in the middle or the top left-hand corner, there's a little bit of an egg peeking out through the sand there. There's probably, I think in this nest, there was a second egg, and that's normally the average number of eggs they have in a nest. It's 2. Sometimes 3, sometimes 1, but mainly 2. On your right-hand side, you also see this little chick sitting in the remains of what was a nest. So you'll see this one is also really nicely decorated and encircled with kind of vegetation. There's some debris inside as well. So you can see that they're very cryptic. And if you're not necessarily looking for a bird or looking for a nest, trampling becomes a concern for us as well. We've had a lot of people stumble across chicks on the beach, and then, they're like, what should I do? Should I pick it up? But actually, they're just hiding in plain sight. Yeah, so this is also very interesting. Obviously, most birds have probably all birds have warning calls, but the reaction to the chicks to the adults warning is quite interesting. So they literally drop wherever they are, whether that is out in the open, whether there is protection or no protection. I mean, you can see that this bird is just lying in a footprint. There's one that is hiding under a piece of leaf. So just to reiterate the point that trampling does become an issue, not just for the eggs, but for the chicks as well. That's why it's just important to kind of be aware if you're walking on the beach, especially by the sounds that the birds make as well, because often that will indicate how close you are to a chick. Cool. Also, these birds are really long-lived. I think that the latest report from Sapring is there's one bird, or there's a report that of a 15-year-old plover. So that's really old, especially for such a small bird. And that also makes it really difficult to observe changes in numbers over time, because even if the birds live long, you won't necessarily see if there isn't any reproduction or birds being added to the population. They're so long-lived. You'll actually only start seeing a dramatic decline once the older generation dies out. So that's why we're also doing our research. It's been, I think, almost 6 years now, and we're going to try and continue just to make sure that the trends that we are seeing are actually true trends and not just, kind of artifacts of a short amount of time. Okay, so how did Nature's Valley Trust start to tackle this problem? This is our foundation for how we tackle any problem. It's a closed loop. We start with research. We then obviously interpret that data or the results that we get from that research. Often we would implement an awareness campaign of some sort if it's needed. We also try and inform management processes to maybe run a bit more effectively and efficiently. And then, of course, last to the loop is the assessment of what we're doing. Is what we're doing actually having a positive impact? And if it's not, you need to adapt and start the loop all over again, basically. And that's just to ensure that there's always adaptive change happening within a system that is by nature quite dynamic. Yeah, so I'm just going to go through each of these different headings with you and just kind of add the plover work into underneath all of those headings to explain to you a little bit more how we did the whole process. The research side, we started by setting up a really small team, and they were just really there to investigate how birds react and are affected by disturbance in their environment. What we'd normally do is we'd go into the beach, locate nests, we'd mark individuals, we monitor breeding success over time. We did some observations on disturbance rates, and then also did what we call manipulated disturbance trials. And I'm going to also just explain each of those for you in a bit more detail. So, of course, you've seen these little guys on the beach. On Nature's Valley, we should have at least one individual of a pair ringed. We currently, actually, before lockdown, or before I left for, like 2 weeks ago, I left for a bit of a vacation. I saw that there's 2 unbanded birds. So there's there's new couple on the beach. Most of them should be ringed. They have a small metal saph ring on it. This ring is normally about 0.01 of a gram of a bird's body weight, so it's very light. The engraved colorings, which makes it possible for us to monitor birds from a distance. So that means we don't have to continuously catch them or disturb them or pick them up or handle them in any way. You can see from the pictures, I have a camera that can zoom in really well, and we can zoom into the picture. You can see the F number on there, and then we can, kind of figure out who the parents are, where they belong, how they're doing, have they fledged, that kind of information. The disturbance work that we did, there was 2 different types of data collection. On the bottom left here, you'll see we have some interns sitting on the beach. Their job was basically to monitor a nest for a 2-hour period at different times of the day, so morning, midday, and afternoon. They would watch one incubating pair, kind of see who's entering the area, how many people are walking through the nesting area, how many dogs are going through the nesting area, and then of course how many times the bird gets scared off or flushed off its nest. The middle round picture and the right-hand side picture, that is what I termed our manipulated disturbance trials earlier. So this is where we are actually the disturbance. So we will walk up to a nest and then record the bird's reaction to our approach. So for instance, we'd set up the tape at 30 meters, the bird sees us. At 25 meters, the bird gets off the nest. So we'll record all of this, and we have averages for basically just to get an idea of where that safe space is for a bird. How close can you actually get before they get scared off the nest? And I'll go through the relevance of them being off their eggs in a little bit. So just in terms of interpreting the data, so just from our disturbance work, this is that initial disturbance stuff that we did where we monitor a bird for 2 hours. So this was a 2-hour period in 2014, 2015, and a 2-hour period in 2015, 2016. Both of them taken in kind of peak summer, December time. In a 2-hour period, we noted that, and we recorded 1,000 people walking through a nesting area. So the clicker that we used to count, it doesn't go higher than 1,000, so we capped it at 1,000. And then the dogs passing through a nesting area, either off leash or on leash, was 34 and 51 for those 2 years respectively. And then the number of times the bird was actually flushed off or scared off the nest was 15 and 19 times respectively for those 2 years. So for the manipulated disturbance trials, so what we found on average is a bird will get off its nest at 30 meters, and this is without a dog companion. If there are dogs with individuals, then they will get off when you're further away. They also take about 4.5 minutes to return back to the nest, and that's if you are walking by. This is not if you decide to sit close to the nest. It obviously then will take longer for them to come back, start incubating the eggs again. And if you're walking past, on average you need to be about 40 meters past the nest for them to feel safe enough to come back. Okay, so at this point, at 30 meters, the bird, you probably didn't even notice the bird is there because it's sitting very still, it's incubating. Your dog probably also hasn't noticed that the bird is there. A lot of people have a misconception that, you know, we don't want dogs on beaches because they chase down birds and they kill birds and they kill chicks, but that doesn't happen that often in reality. The problem more is the birds kind of inherent fear of a four-legged mammalian predator. That's how they've evolved. They probably can't tell a dog from a mongoose or, you know, otter, but they know that a four-legged hairy animal is a predator. So it's more about their response to having that in their environment. Something else we did just to kind of get a gauge on what an egg might experience on the beach, we used some eye button loggers. It was placed in a fake egg in flour. So it said that flour has the same conductive properties as the albumin in an egg, so the egg white. Put it in flour in a fake egg. We then left the eye buttons in shade, and then the other half was left in the sun. The shade is to simulate an egg being incubated, because not a lot of people know, but shorebirds actually, they incubate or they sit on their eggs to cool them down. Just because the temperature gets so hot on the beach, you can imagine if it's a 40-degree or 35-degree day, ambient temperature, it's probably close to 45 degrees on the sand itself. Then, yeah, so just to go to this graph quickly. So this was a 2-hour period from 11 to 1 o'clock on a summer's day in December. These are 20-minute intervals here. This is about 5 minutes. And I just want to take you up here. You'd see that within 5 to about 7 minutes, you can quite easily reach up to 40 degrees Celsius within an egg that's not shaded or being incubated. Why I'm just pointing out the 42 degrees Celsius is because that's the thermal capacity of an egg. So anything above 42 degrees and your embryo will overheat and die. So that's a critical number for us. And the fact that it's exposed egg can go this high this quickly, it is worrying. Basically, on a warm summer's day, you can, you know, your egg can overheat and die within kind of 5 to 7 minutes. On an extremely hot summer's day, which we're getting more of now, it can die even quicker. It takes even less time to overheat and die. Okay, so now you can imagine if you're having 1,000 people on any particular day walking on the beach, going through a nesting area, whether there's dogs included in that or not, it takes about 4.5 minutes for a bird to return if you're walking fast. And it can take as easy as 5 minutes for your eggs to overheat and die. The window to actually produce viable offspring becomes smaller and smaller the hotter it gets and the more people are on the beach. So it is quite a problem, and that probably explains why the breeding success has been so low. This is the results for the 2015-2016 breeding season. It was, I think, the first season where they actually started collecting like proper consistent data. So this was over the 4 beaches, all the way from Robert, Lookout, Kerbums, Nature's Valley. I think there was about 35 nesting pairs that season. From that came 152 eggs. 58 of them hatched, and only 15 of them made it to a stage where they could actually fly. That brings us down to about a 10% success rate across the whole Greater Plettenberg Bay area beaches. Yeah, so you can see that's very low for a shore breeding bird. Normally it's about 30 to 40 in a species that's doing well and a shore breeder. So yeah, how did we take the next steps? We started our awareness campaign just to kind of highlight the species, because I feel like they're very inconspicuous. People don't really know they exist. If you're not looking for them, you don't know they're there. If you're not aware about your surroundings, you probably won't even notice if they, you know, causing a ruckus right next to you. So we wanted to try and get people empathetic, to get them, you know, to start pulling at their heartstrings. So we decided decided to start developing just some accurate, locally relevant info boards, information, and just get that out there. We wanted to run like a strong, positive media campaign. So not so much you're not allowed your dogs here, but more you're allowed your dogs over there. So we wanted to make it obviously emotionally appealing. We wanted strong stakeholder engagement. So we wanted the public involved. We wanted all the stakeholders to have their voices heard. And we also wanted a consistent presence on social media and on the beaches. So what we did is we often did these kind of public open days where we took people on the beaches. We made them take off their shoes so they could feel the heat of the sand, and just to kind of make people more aware and to make them understand what the problem is and how they can assist and make it a bit easier on the birds. We often also, if there's families on the beach and we're doing research, we'll often, invite them over to come learn a bit more about the beach, just for them to have that connection to the birds as well. And we did a lot of articles in newspapers. We did some radio interviews. I actually also just did one with the Bird Club on Plate Radio, which was also a very nice experience, and also just to like give our Plate listeners an idea of what's happening on our beaches. We work closely with the Blue Flag stewards, so very helpful. Plate Tourism has been a real advocate for us as well, and a really good partner through all of this. We did some pamphlets with Chrissy Kluter. She developed a really beautiful signboard for us with locally relevant. It's happening on our beaches. Everything that you can find, the fishermen's bins are all on there. They're really beautiful boards. I did some nesting area signs just to indicate to people where the nests are, make them aware to kind of give it a little bit of space. Yeah, this is our Rockies. You all probably remember 2 years ago, so 3 years ago now, we had the Rocky oyster catcher as our bird of the year, and that was with BirdLife South Africa. Really cute little Rockies, also just to promote the cause. We had the Sands of Change, which was a very saucy soap opera that we had on Facebook. It was a type of soapy of the birds and their lives and everything they got up to. We had quite a interesting reach from the mostly the tunnies of Plate. They really enjoyed it. You also can adopt a plover. So we have, for a small fee that goes into conservation, you get to name a bird. You get a certificate with a unique ring number on that. Yeah, and that's also just to kind of bring a little bit more funding into the program. We developed this was also done by Chrissy. It was a Sandy and Rocky, which is our plover and our oyster catcher mascot. You always see them on our social media platforms and on our kind of info that we send out. We also did kind of a Tinder dating profile for Romeo. We had a lot of information on him. He's looking for a beautiful young lass to spend the rest of his days with. And on Valentine's Day, he was in a relationship with Juliet Tweeting. So this was also just something fun, lighthearted, that kind of, something cute that people could connect to. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we always try and inform management decisions, because the research that we are getting is, I think it's manage beaches better, and it has. So we've been doing behind the scenes work for a long while before we actually got the beaches zoned. We obviously had to engage all kinds of authorities on that, include stakeholders like the ratepayers associations. PAWS was included as animal welfare. We had Sandparks and Cape Nature. So we all sat together and decided the best way forward. And this was really to just adjust management of beaches in a way that is not only, beneficial to us, but also to the wildlife on it. And we really wanted to add value to local municipalities, because often it is funding restraints that come into play. It is capacity. So it's important for us to also add value to local municipality. Yeah, and then obviously we implemented new systems. With stakeholder engagement, we sat, I think it took 18 months for us actually to get somewhere with this, but as I mentioned, we had a whole bunch of stakeholders on board, and we used the research that we had for 3 years at that point to identify kind of where birds are breeding, where the hotspots are. And of course, we couldn't always make a red area where there were birds, because it's all about compromise as well. So some red areas don't have birds in it, but it might be a blue flags beach, because by international standards those have to be dog free. We also have green areas for dogs off leash, that there are multiple pairs breeding, because obviously birds also move around, they don't stay where they're supposed to. So there is a lot of compromise in the system, and yeah, we feel like there was enough input to get a good compromise for everyone. So this is how we zone the beaches. We use the robot colors, and then we also have like an emotive little dog on there, just for, you know, things like color blindness. So it's just like a green happy dog to indicate that your dog may be off leash here. And then we have a really well behaved orange dog that needs to be on a leash in this area. And then we have a very sad red dog that is not allowed in that area. We also have really nice dog boards at each of the entrances along every beach. It indicates where you are, what zone you're going into, where your closest green zone, orange zone, and red zone is. And then these little signs I put up about 30 meters, because now we know that they need on average about 30 meters before they get off their eggs. So we put this up where we can. Sometimes it's not possible because the beaches are a bit narrow in certain areas, but we put these signs up. They're connected by a kind of a thin film of just rope. And you can see that just something as simple as this does make a big difference in where people walk. So you can see that there's all these footprints on the outside of the nesting area, but the nesting area itself is pretty free of, except my footprints going in there, but it's quite free of actual disturbance. Okay, so now we get to the nitty-gritty. This is the actual results that we have since the start of the program. You don't really have to focus on the table so much. Those are the raw numbers. Breeding success is indicated on the right-hand side in percentages. So basically, as you will remember, across the 4 beaches, there was about a 10%, 9.8% success rate. On Lookout, however, this was around, when you just look at the site itself, it was around 10.9 when we first started, and Nature's Valley was a little bit higher at 15.4%. Okay? We implemented the signage and the ropes in 2017-2018. You'll see for Nature's Valley in green that it took it basically up to double it was before. And that is more indicative of what you would find for a shore breeding bird. It's around 30%. Last season it was up to 33%, which is great. Lookout Beach is not doing so great. Since the implementation has actually gone down, there's various reasons for this. With high sea level and storm surges, the peninsula sometimes gets cut off from mainland. So water does play a big role on that site, and often nests get washed away in the low-lying sites. This is also right next to the largest kelp gull colony in South Africa. So Klein's Peninsula has the largest kelp gull colony, and a lot of those birds have actually moved across the mouth and is now nesting on Lookout. So predation has gone up on plover eggs. The oyster catchers are also doing much better on Lookout Beach, and they unfortunately are also, if they can, taking eggs where they can. And of course, this is a red beach because of, you know, the amount of birds that breed there. There's an array of them. Some ibises have just moved in, so we have about 3 little colonies of ibises breeding there at the moment. There's thickneys, there's Egyptian geese, there's egrets, little egrets breeding there as well. So there's an array of different birds breeding. So it is a red beach, so no dogs allowed. It also is a blue flags beach, a section of it, so another reason for it to be red. But unfortunately, we still have a lot of dogs visiting the beach there. We are trying to revitalize our relationship with Vito municipality. Obviously, the lockdown and COVID has thrown a bit of a spanner in the works, but we're trying to look into getting it formally gazetted. And the Plet Bird Club has been a really fantastic help with just giving us support with that as well, and also for funding signage. And yeah, it's just been amazing having them on board as well. But yeah, the point is that we're really hoping to just get some stricter policing on that beach specifically, just so, you know, it's already facing a lot of natural kind of events that are not helpful to the plovers, but just to get a grip on our impact on the birds on that beach, because that is one of the beaches that have the most plovers breeding on them currently. But yeah, this is basically what we've been up to for the last 5 years. It's still being written up as a PhD, so obviously this is just a simple correlation that I've done here, but we need to be doing some more in-depth statistical analyses, and Selena will be doing that as part of her whole PhD thesis write-up. But I think that we at least doing something positive in Nature's Valley. So I think we're going to just keep paying it forward and helping these birds out, and hopefully get Lookout Beach on board as well, and just get some stricter policing and management of that area.